four-person panel for Jaws, Mr. Carl Gottlieb.
Yeah!
Jeffrey Kramer. Susan Backlighty.
Yeah! Jaws! Woo!
Hello.
Hello. Hey!
My name is Jeffrey Kramer. I play Hendrix in the movie Jaws.
Woo!
Mr. Joe Alves, who designed it all. And
Yeah! Woo!
Carl Gottlieb, who wrote and played Meadows in the movie.
Woo! Yeah!
And Susan Backlighty, who played Chrissie.
Woo! Yeah!
And we're going to take you for a little quick trip into the movies at the time and put Jaws into a little perspective for you. And then we'll tell you some anecdotes, and Joe will talk about charts and how to make one. To start it off, I think Carl is going to talk a little bit about the movies at that time to put it all into perspective.
Since then, we've seen the death. Is this on?
Yeah, it's on.
It says on. It says on. Since then, the movie industry has changed considerably. But back in 1974 at Universal, there was still a studio system in place. Pictures had budgets and controls. They had a staff, camera department, a prop department, grip department, set department. There were departments where people came regularly to work under contract. Films were planned 2 years ahead in terms of a release schedule. There were budget controls in place. It was a factory. And it was a factory that made dreams, which is how they used to call them, the dream factories, the old studios. And in every studio, producers fought with the studios and each other to get their projects favored, to get them placed, to get them funded and financed, and then finally to get them properly distributed, to get the studio to spend the money to advertise and release a picture. These were all things that didn't happen automatically. They were in place, but you had to fight for every speck of budget and for every ad in the trades and every ad in the press and every network ad on radio and television if you wanted your picture to be a success. Zanuck and Brown, Richard Zanuck and David Brown were established producers. Richard Zanuck had run Fox Studios. His father had been one of the founding fathers of the industry who had created the studio system. Darryl Zanuck and Warner Brothers and Louis B. Mayer and Elring Thalberg had actually created the factory system. They invented the movies as we know them. And in those days, producers had to struggle to get a picture approved by their studio. Zanuck and Brown had heard about the novel Jaws pre-publication. David Brown had influences in the publishing world. He had a copy of the Galley Proofs. He read it. He thought it would be a pretty good summer novel, what they call a beach read. And he thought it would be a good book to option for the movies. But he didn't want to spend his own money to option it. Producers were as cheap as any producers. And he had to convince the studio to actually set up a production. And that meant getting a production budget number so that they could charge things against the picture and actually buy the first things they needed to make the movie. But rather than buy it, they wanted to get it for free, which is where Joe comes in.
Well, and the whole studio system where people were under contract.
Joe
was.
All right, I'll go into that. We're going to get the video set up pretty soon. Basically, I came up through the studio system, and you started, like in the art department, I started as a junior set designer. You're the last to be hired, first to be fired, and you work from studio to studio. And I was fortunate to sort of land a home at Universal and work on It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World. And then very lucky as assistant art director, worked with Alfred Hitchcock on Torn Curtain. And then my big break as an art director was actually in Rod Serling's Night Gallery.
Wow.
In front the night gallery, I met a lot of young directors. One of them was Steven Spielberg, John Adams, Schwartz, and so on. Anyway, I worked with Steven and Zanuck and Brown on Circle Line Express. Now, when they bought the galleys, they didn't have a charge number. So instead of getting a high-powered illustrator, Dick, I'm sure, said, look at Joe's working at the studio, he'll do it for nothing. So Joe did it for nothing while I was doing the movie. And so if we could show those video.
Nope, there you go.
Woo! These are storyboards, not storyboards, illustrations I did based on the galley sheets. And so they end up, well, that's
that one's nice.
The T-shirt. You'll see that. And there's Susan.
Yeah. There you go.
And so these were just really rough cuts. And actually, this was before Steven was even on the movie.
Wow. So young.
They didn't have anybody committed, as I was committed for nothing. So, so it was a good deal. This was
For them.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it turned out a pretty good deal for me too. Yeah. Just as a kid.
Oh.
That's an illustration I have.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, that would have been the last.
Thank God there's no shot like that.
In Gardner. Anyway, so the idea was to take all these drawings, the 24, and we had a meeting with all the department heads in Marshall Green's office, who was the head of production. And I went up and I gave the big, sales job. And Steven was there. I don't think he was signed yet. And so each department was represented. And when I finished, they asked the effects department, and they said, well, we can't do that. It would take 1.5 to 2 years to build this. So no one's ever done that. Besides, we have more important movies like The Hindenburg. And, Marshall Green got really upset when he pounded his fist on the desk and said, Jaws could be a bigger movie than The Hindenburg, and everybody laughed.
Oh.
So as we finished the meeting, he called me back and he said, you think you get the shark bait? And I said, yeah. I mean, why not? And he said, okay, then take it off the studio lot, take it out of the studio system, and just go make it. And we'll stop there, and we'll talk about it later, how we made it. That's just a model, and we'll get to that later.
And then, Joe also had to find out where he might shoot this movie.
Well, I met Peter Benchley in New York, and I asked him where were the various places, and he said Montauk is where the fishermen lived, and Sag Harbor. There's various communities. Now, not only were we looking for a beautiful village that we could destroy with a shark, we needed a bay. We had figured out by this time that we had an apparatus that Bob Batty designed that you would float out, a big platform, and then sink, and then there was a crane on a track. And we needed approximately 25 feet of water with a very low tide change so that we wouldn't show too much of the shark mechanism. And so anyway, I went looking, and I said, what about these islands, Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket? And he said, there's nothing to Martha's Vineyard. Go to Nantucket, my parents lived there, and blah, blah, blah. So I scouted all of the East Coast, and it was in the winter, dead of winter. I was scouting beaches. Trying to get to Nantucket, and the weather was so bad, the boat turned around. And I said, well, there's Martha's Vineyard, it's a short distance away. So I went there, and it was beautiful. I mean, Edgartown was fantastic. And I went to Menemsha, the fishing village, and I was a big fan of David Leans, and he used to build everything. And I said, my God, he would have built Menemsha, you know. And right at the very front part of it was this empty lot. And I thought that'd be the perfect place for a quick strike. And then, by the way, there's a bay there, and it just happens to be 25 feet, and the tide was perfect. We got it, no problem, right? Except, talk about that.
Except that, you know, it was a small New England town, and they don't love Hollywood.
Right.
A little bit. We're going a little too fast because I think Carl wanted to talk about his getting involved into this, into the script. He and Stephen had been friends.
Well, so Joe was actually hired before Steven Spielberg. He was the first person who actually worked on Jaws. First for nothing, and then for a small stipend as a
Very small.
scouting the locations. Meanwhile, Steven was developing the script, and the reason Steven was developing the script was Zanuck and Brown was looking around for other directors, and they had met with a director who showed the name remained nameless, named Dick Richards. I always forget that. Who had a meeting and kept saying, and then the whale jumps into the boat, and Peter Benchley would say, no, it's not a whale, it's a shark. And then Dick would say, yes, and order another martini, and say, and then the whale eats the bird. No, it's not a whale, it's a shark. So Peter Benchley says to Zanuck and Brown, the guy keeps calling it a whale, it's not a fish, he's not the right director.
Yeah.
So Stephen had seen the script on Zanuck and Brown's desk, and snatched it, and looked at it, and said, how about if I direct this? And he'd just done Sugarland and had done a good job for them, and it was a well-reviewed, well-received movie, but it was not a commercial success. But they agreed to let Stephen run with it. And then Stephen sent me a copy of the script with 2 words written on the cover. It said, eviscerate this. And we had been friends. I had appeared in 2 of his television movies. We had talked about movies we wanted to make together. We had the same agent. We used to go out to try to sell a project with me writing and Stephen directing, and we could never get a deal because the agent insisted that Stephen be locked into directing anything we wrote. But every studio we went to was, who is this guy? No.
Right.
We're not guaranteeing him a directing job, just the writing job. But in any case, he said eviscerate this. So I took it apart, and as was my custom in those days, I